Good morning. This is an open meeting of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Today we're considering a recommendation that the Commission approve for public comment proposed rules that would fundamentally revise the regulatory regime for asset-backed securities. The proposed rules are intended to better protect investors in the securitization market by giving them more detailed information about pooled assets, more time to make their investment decisions, and the benefits of better alignment of the interests of issuers and investors through a retention or skin in the game requirement. And the rules would bring greater transparency to the private markets as well. As we know all too well, securitization, that is the buying and bundling of assets such as housing, student, or commercial loans into securities that are then sold to investors, played a central role in the financial crisis. Like most investment products, securitization has both its positive and negative attributes. At one time, the securitization market provided trillions of dollars of liquidity to virtually every sector of the economy. This enabled lenders to make loans and credit available to a wide range of borrowers and companies seeking financing. But securitization has also fostered poor lending practices by encouraging lenders to shift the risk of loss to investors. In the area of mortgage-backed securities, sound underwriting practices sometimes took a back seat to immediate profits. When poorly underwritten mortgages began to default, the securities backed by the mortgages lost their value. Investors suffered significant losses and have consequently largely withdrawn from this market. During the past year, we have worked hard to better understand the practices that contributed to the financial crisis and to identify ways to prevent reoccurrence in the future. We, along with the other financial regulators, have looked closely at ABS oversight, both in the public and private markets for these instruments, and have concluded that we can and must do a better job of protecting investors. The release that the Commission is considering today is the result of our comprehensive reevaluation of existing rules and our conclusion that three fundamental things need to change in order to better protect investors and promote more efficient asset-backed securities markets. First, investors must have better information about the pooled assets that back these securities. This information must be both granular and current enough to provide investors the data they need to accurately assess risk and value. It also must be provided in a manner and within a time frame so that investors can access and use the information effectively. Second, the interests of organizations that issue and sponsor these securities can be better aligned with the interests of investors. And third, we must consider the impact that more rigorous rules for the public ABS market will have on the private ABS market and make sure we are not simply moving tomorrow's problems into a less regulated area. There are likely many avenues to address these macro objectives. As the staff will explain in more detail in a moment, the release proposes to address these issues in a number of specific ways. First, to provide investors with better, more timely, and usable information, the proposal would require ABS issuers to file with the Commission standardized information about the specific loans in the pool, allowing investors to better understand their investment. This loan-level information would be required at the time that the asset is securitized and on an ongoing basis. Additionally, these issuers would be required to file on the SEC website a computer program of the contractual cash flow provisions, or waterfall. The waterfall is essentially the rules that dictate how the borrower's loan payments are distributed to investors in the ABS, how losses or lack of payment on those loans is divided among investors, and when administrative expenses such as servicing fees are paid to service providers. This computer program could be used to analyze the loan level information and would give investors and the markets better tools to analyze asset-backed securities. And lastly, in this area, the proposal would, for the first time, give investors a minimum period of time, 5 days, to consider transaction-specific information, including the loan level data, before an ABS investment decision needs to be made. Second, to better align interests as well as improve the quality of securities that are offered through the shelf registration process, the proposal would remove references to the ABS credit rating as an eligibility requirement for shelf registration, replacing this instead with 4 new eligibility criteria. The Chief Executive Officer of the ABS depositor would need to certify that the assets have characteristics that provide a reasonable basis to believe they will produce cash flows as described in the prospectus. The ABS sponsor would be required to retain 5% of the securitization, net of the sponsor's hedging, to ensure that the sponsor, like investors, has skin in the game. The ABS issuer would also be required to provide a mechanism whereby the investors could confirm that the assets comply with the issuer's representations and warranties, such as representations and warranties that the loans in the pool were underwritten in a manner consistent with the lender's underwriting standards. And the ABS issuer would have to agree to file Exchange Act reports with the Commission on an ongoing basis. And lastly, we need to re-examine the assumption, in light of the financial crisis, that sophisticated investors do not need the types of protections that come with registration under the Securities Act. And further, as we make improvements to the disclosure provisions which apply in the public markets, we also must address the potential that these changes will further drive ABS transactions to the private structured products markets, where some types of asset-backed securities are sold. As a result, we're proposing that when an SEC safe harbor is relied upon for the unregistered sale of securities, for example, under Rule 144A or Regulation D, the issuers would have to provide investors, upon request, the same information that would be required if the offering were in the public markets. This information would need to be provided at the time of the offering and on an ongoing basis. The proposal also would require that an ABS issuer file a public notice of the initial placement of securities to be sold under Rule 144A, and this notice would require information tailored to ABS offerings and be publicly filed with the SEC in its EDGAR database. Form D, the notice of an offering made in reliance on Reg D, would also be revised to collect information on structured finance products. This release represents a fundamental revision to the way in which the ABS market would be regulated. I think the changes are critical components of restoring investor confidence, but the 90-day comment period will provide a very important opportunity for market participants to weigh in on the judgment calls that we have preliminarily made. During this time, I've also asked that our staff continue to work with the other financial regulators, the FDIC, the OCC, Fed, Treasury, and the President's Working Group, to ensure that our work in this area is fully informed by the activities and the views of our regulatory colleagues. Before I ask Meredith to provide us with more details on the proposal, I would like to thank our staff for their yeoman's effort in this very weighty project. From the Division of Corporate Finance, thank you to Meredith Cross, Paula Dudley, Kathy Shue, Rolane Bancroft, Cecile Peters, Amy Starr, Jennifer Sapralka, Max Webb, Julie Rizzo, Lauren Wynn, Shu Liu, Christina Padden, John Harrington, Paula Lee, Paul Dudek, and Jerry Laporte. From our Office of the General Counsel, our thanks go to David Becker, David Fredrickson, Bryant Morris, and Bill Barton. And also a thank you to our colleagues in the Division of Risk, Strategy, and Financial Innovation, specifically Henry Hu, Adam Glass, Greg Berman, Rick Bookstaber, Josh White, Stas Nikolova, Kathleen Hanley, and Don Monk. And now let me turn the meeting over to Meredith Cross, Director of the Division of Corporation Finance.